You're nothing but a burden, my son screamed so loudly the silverware rattled against the kitchen counter. And for a second, nobody moved. Not me, not his wife, not even my 12-year-old grandson sitting frozen at the dining table with mashed potatoes still on his fork. Jason, I whispered, honestly believing he'd realize what he just said and take it back. But instead he pointed straight at the front door like I was some stranger who'd overstayed his welcome. You heard me, Dad. We can't keep living like this. My daughter-in-law Melissa crossed her arms and looked away while I stood there holding 2 grocery bags I had just paid for with my own credit card less than 20 minutes earlier. I buy the food, I said quietly. I watch the kids every day. I paid for half this house. Jason laughed, and somehow that hurt worse than the yelling. Paid for half the house, he snapped. That doesn't mean you own our lives. My granddaughter Chloe looked up at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, Grandpa, are you leaving? And I swear to God, that question nearly broke me right there in that kitchen. Before I tell you how my own son threw me out after I spent almost $150,000 helping his family, I just want to say something real quick. If this story speaks to your heart, or if you've ever felt unwanted by people you sacrificed everything for, I'd truly appreciate it if you took a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if this story genuinely resonates with you. And wherever you're watching from tonight, whether it's Texas, Canada, Australia, or somewhere halfway across the world, leave your city, your country, and your local time in the comments because honestly, hearing from good people out there makes nights like this feel a little less lonely. My name is Walter Bennett. I'm 72 years old, born and raised in Arizona, and the night my son called me a burden was the night everything I believed about family finally shattered. But the truth is, this didn't start in that kitchen. Not even close. It started 3 years earlier, the winter after my wife Linda died. Losing Linda felt like somebody had unplugged the world. 46 years together, and suddenly I was eating microwave dinners alone in complete silence. No music, no TV, just the sound of the refrigerator humming at 2 in the morning while I sat in my recliner staring at walls we picked out together back in 1989. Jason started calling more after the funeral. At first, I thought he was worried about me. Dad, you shouldn't be alone all the time, he told me one night over the phone. Come spend more time with us. The kids miss you. That hit me hard because I adored those kids. Ethan loved baseball just like I did, and Chloe used to run into my arms every time I visited. So when Jason invited me to dinner a few weeks later, I drove over thinking maybe family was exactly what I needed to survive losing Linda. Their house in Scottsdale was beautiful, bigger than anything Jason could have afforded 10 years earlier when he was still bouncing between jobs and late rent payments. Melissa opened the door smiling too wide. Walter, the kids made dessert for you, she said, and for a little while, it honestly felt nice. Warm, like maybe I still belonged somewhere. We sat around their oversized marble kitchen island while Melissa poured wine and Jason talked about mortgage payments, inflation, property taxes, and how stressful life had become. I remember him rubbing his forehead saying, Sometimes I don't know how we're going to keep this place. Then Melissa looked right at me and sighed. We're drowning, Walter. Looking back now, I should have noticed how rehearsed it sounded. But back then, all I saw was my son looking exhausted. And maybe part of me wanted to feel useful again after Linda died. Jason leaned closer across the counter and lowered his voice. Honestly, Dad, if we lose this house, I don't know what happens to the kids. That sentence stayed with me all night long. I barely slept. Around 6 in the morning, I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at my retirement account statements while sunlight came through the blinds. Linda and I spent decades building those savings. Extra shifts, missed vacations, working Saturdays in 115-degree Phoenix heat running my HVAC company. Every dollar meant something. But Jason was my son, and I honestly believed helping him meant protecting my family. What I didn't know back then was that there was already something else happening behind my back. Something Jason and Melissa never thought I'd find out about. And when I finally did, it changed everything between us forever. Jason was not always cold to me. That is the part people never understand when families fall apart. Nobody sees the tiny cracks while they are happening. They only notice the collapse after the roof caves in. When Jason was 8 years old, he used to wait for me by the front window every evening wearing this little red Phoenix Suns backpack that looked too big for his shoulders. The second my truck pulled into the driveway, he would sprint outside yelling, "Dad's home," like I was some kind of hero. Back then, I worked 12-hour days installing air conditioning units across Arizona neighborhoods where summer temperatures could hit 115 degrees before noon. I would come home drenched in sweat, hands cut up from sheet metal, knees aching so badly I could barely climb the porch steps, and that kid would still wrap both arms around my waist like I was the best thing in his world. Linda used to smile watching us from the doorway. "You spoil him too much," she would laugh. The truth was, maybe I did. Jason was our only son. We had lost a baby girl before him, years earlier, and I think part of Linda never stopped being afraid something could happen to him too. So every birthday became bigger than it should have been. Every Christmas had one extra present under the tree. Every mistake got forgiven faster than it probably should have. I remember one afternoon when Jason was 16 and backed my Ford F-150 straight into the neighbor's mailbox while trying to impress a girl from school. The entire rear bumper was crushed. Linda crossed her arms and said, "Walter, do not bail him out this time." But Jason looked at me with those nervous blue eyes and quietly said, "Dad, please." So I paid for the repairs myself and told him, "Everybody screws up sometimes." Looking back now, that sentence followed him into adulthood like poison. Because Jason learned something dangerous early in life. He learned that no matter what happened, Dad would fix it. College tuition? I handled it. His first apartment deposit? Me again. When he blew through $8,000 trying to launch some online sports memorabilia business at 27, I wrote another check, while Linda sat silently at the kitchen table staring into her coffee mug. After he left that night, she finally said, "You are teaching him to lean on you forever." I still remember getting defensive. "He is my son," I snapped back. "What am I supposed to do? Let him fail?" Linda looked at me for a long time before answering. Sometimes failing teaches people gratitude. At the time, I thought she was being harsh. But after she died, those words started echoing inside my head more and more. Especially once Melissa entered the picture. The first time I met her was at a steakhouse in Tempe. She showed up 20 minutes late carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than my first motorcycle. She hugged me quickly and immediately started talking about neighborhoods, school districts, and vacation resorts before the appetizers even arrived. "Jason deserves more than struggling forever," she said while scrolling through pictures of million-dollar homes on her phone. Linda gave me a look across the table that only married people understand. It was that silent look that says, "Be careful." But Jason was crazy about her. Completely blinded. If Melissa wanted something, he moved mountains trying to get it. Bigger apartment, better car, country club membership they absolutely could not afford. Every time they fell behind financially, Jason called me sounding exhausted and embarrassed. "Just until I get caught up, Dad. Just a little help this month. Things are tight right now." And every single time, I said yes. Because that is what fathers do when they love their children more than they love being respected. A few months after Linda passed away, Jason started inviting me over almost every weekend. Sunday dinners, baseball games with Ethan, school recitals for Chloe. It felt comforting at first, almost healing. Melissa suddenly became unusually warm toward me too. "Walter, stay longer," she would say. "The kids light up when you are here." One night after dinner, I noticed Jason and Melissa whispering to each other in the kitchen while glancing toward me every few seconds. The second I walked in, they stopped talking. Melissa smiled too quickly. Jason cleared his throat and said, "Dad, we have actually been wanting to ask you something." And the moment I sat down at that kitchen island, I had no idea my entire life was about to start changing in ways I could never take back. Jason slid a folder across the kitchen island that night like it weighed 100 pounds. Melissa sat beside him twisting her wedding ring while the kids watched television in the living room, completely unaware their parents looked like people standing on the edge of a cliff. "Dad," Jason said carefully, "we are behind on the mortgage." I opened the folder and saw red letters stamped across the top of the statement. "Past due. 32 days late." Melissa immediately jumped in. "We have been trying to handle it ourselves, Walter." "We really have." I looked up at them both. "How far behind are you?" Jason exhaled hard and rubbed his face. "Too far." There was a long silence after that. I could hear Chloe laughing at some cartoon in the other room, while Melissa stared down at the marble countertop like she could not bear eye contact. Then Jason finally said the number. $148,000. It felt like somebody dropped a cinder block into my chest. "That is not catching up," I said quietly. That is saving the entire house. Jason nodded once. I know. Melissa reached for my hand. Walter, we would never ask if it was not serious. The strange thing is, part of me already knew what I was going to do before they even finished talking. Because when you spend your whole life protecting your family, your brain stops asking whether people deserve saving. You just move automatically. Like a reflex. Jason looked exhausted that night. Real exhaustion too, not fake tears. His hair was thinning faster than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching. For a second, all I saw was that little boy waiting by the window for me to come home from work. If we lose this house, he said softly, the kids lose everything. That sentence got me. Ethan had baseball trophies lined across his bedroom shelves. Chloe had little watercolor paintings taped all over the refrigerator. Their whole world existed inside those walls. I asked Jason for a few days to think about it, but the truth was I already knew I would help them. The next morning I drove across Phoenix to meet with my financial advisor, a man named Greg Holloway who had handled my retirement account for nearly 15 years. He looked stunned when I explained what I wanted to withdraw. Walter, this is a major chunk of your savings, he warned me. Once this money is gone, it is gone. I remember staring out the office window at traffic crawling through downtown while heat waves shimmered above the pavement outside. It is family, I told him. Greg leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together. Sometimes family becomes very comfortable spending money that was never theirs. That line sat in my stomach the entire drive home. But 3 days later, I still transferred the money. I still signed the paperwork. I still walked into Jason's kitchen carrying the cashier's check inside a white envelope. Melissa burst into tears the second she saw it. Oh my God, she whispered, covering her mouth. Jason stood up so fast his chair scraped against the tile floor. Dad, are you serious? I handed him the envelope. Do not lose the house. For one brief moment, I felt loved again. Jason hugged me tighter than he had hugged me in years. Melissa kept saying, you saved us. You literally saved us. Even Ethan ran over yelling. Mom says Grandpa is a hero, and hearing that nearly made me cry right there in front of everybody. That night Melissa cooked steak, opened expensive wine, and kept insisting I should move in with them permanently. You should not be alone anymore, she said warmly. This is your family too. Linda would have noticed the timing immediately. I should have too. But grief makes lonely people ignore warning signs they would normally never miss. A week later, Jason drove me out to the property office to add my financial contribution to some housing paperwork for protection purposes. That was how he phrased it. Protection. I remember the young woman behind the desk smiling politely while handing us forms to sign. Jason rushed through everything quickly, talking nonstop, barely letting me read the pages. And for the first time in my life, I did something unusual. I stopped signing halfway through and looked directly at him. Why are you nervous? I asked. Jason froze for half a second before laughing too loudly. I am not nervous, Dad. But his eyes never met mine after that. And deep down, something inside me quietly started waking up. After that meeting at the property office, something changed in the house, but it happened slowly enough that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. At first, Jason and Melissa treated me like family royalty. Melissa suddenly started introducing me to people as the reason we still have this home. Jason invited me to every barbecue, every school event, every birthday dinner. He even started calling me more often just to check in. Looking back now, it feels rehearsed, like actors reading from the same script. A month later, Jason asked if I would consider moving into their guest room permanently. Dad, it makes no sense for you to rattle around that empty house alone, he said while we sat on the patio watching Ethan practice pitching in the backyard. The kids love having you here. Melissa nodded immediately. And honestly, Walter, you help calm Jason down. He has been under so much pressure. I should have asked myself why their kindness only intensified after my money entered their lives. But grief clouds judgment. Loneliness makes even fake warmth feel real. So I sold my house. That was the part that still hurts to admit out loud. Linda and I bought that home in 1987. Every doorway carried memories. Pencil marks on the laundry room wall measuring Jason's height as a kid. The cracked tile Linda always said we would eventually replace. Her garden in the backyard where roses somehow survived Arizona summers that killed everything else. Packing up that house felt like burying her all over again. The day the moving truck arrived, I stood in the driveway holding one of Linda's old coffee mugs while Melissa smiled and said, "This is a fresh start for all of us." I wanted to believe her. At first, living with them seemed normal. I helped with the kids, picked up groceries, drove Chloe to piano lessons twice a week, cooked dinner sometimes when Melissa worked late. Ethan started calling me his roommate grandpa, which honestly made me laugh. But little things started happening. Small things. Strange things. One afternoon, I overheard Melissa talking on the phone in the kitchen while she thought I was upstairs. "No, his retirement is solid," she whispered. "Jason says there is still plenty left." I froze halfway down the staircase. Retirement. She was talking about my money. A few days later, Jason casually asked me if I had updated my will recently. "Just practical stuff, Dad," he said too quickly. "You know, in case anything happens." I remember staring at him across the dinner table while Chloe colored pictures beside us. "Why are you asking me that?" Jason shrugged without looking up from his phone. "Melissa just thinks families should be organized." Melissa smiled immediately. "Nobody is trying to pressure you, Walter." The strange thing was, nobody had accused her of pressuring me until she said that. Then came the stories. Stories I did not even know were being told. At Ethan's baseball game one Saturday, another parent pulled me aside near the bleachers. "It is really generous what your son is doing for you," he said kindly. "Not many people would take in a parent full-time like that." I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. "What do you mean?" The man looked confused. "Jason said your finances got rough after your wife passed, and that they stepped up to help." I felt my stomach drop so fast it honestly made me dizzy. I just stood there hearing kids cheer in the background while the Arizona sun burned against the back of my neck. Jason had told people I was struggling financially, that they rescued me, that I moved in because I needed help. Suddenly dozens of little comments from the past few months started making horrible sense. Melissa telling neighbors, "Walter is adjusting." Jason joking at barbecues, "Retirement is expensive these days." They were building a story around me piece by piece, and everybody believed it, because why would they not? They were younger, successful looking, beautiful house, smiling family photos online. Meanwhile, I was the old widower living in their guest room. That night, I confronted Jason quietly in the garage while he unpacked golf clubs from his SUV. "Why are people saying you support me financially?" Jason did not even look surprised. He just sighed like I was being difficult. "Dad, relax. It is easier than explaining everything." "Explaining what?" I asked. "That I paid $148,000 to save your house." Jason finally looked at me then, irritation flashing across his face. "Do you really need credit for everything?" That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because suddenly I realized something terrifying. Somewhere along the line, my sacrifice had stopped being gratitude in their eyes and started becoming something inconvenient they needed to erase. And standing there in that garage with the smell of gasoline and summer heat surrounding us, I had the horrible feeling that I was already losing my place in my own family. After that conversation in the garage, I started noticing how deeply the story had spread. It was everywhere once I knew to look for it. At church, people suddenly spoke to me with this careful softness usually reserved for sick people or men who had lost everything. One Sunday after service, an older woman named Carol squeezed my arm and whispered, "You are blessed your son took you in. Some elderly people are not so lucky." Elderly people. The words sat in my chest like wet concrete. I smiled politely because I did not know what else to do. Meanwhile, Jason and Melissa kept polishing the narrative little by little until it became the official version of reality. Melissa posted photos online captioned things like, "3 generations under one roof. Family takes care of family." People flooded the comments praising them. "You guys are amazing. Your children are learning." Compassion. Not many couples would sacrifice privacy like this. I remember staring at my phone one night reading those comments while sitting alone in the guest room I had practically paid for. Nobody knew the truth. Worse than that, nobody even questioned the lie because Jason and Melissa delivered it so naturally. The humiliating part was not one giant moment. It was death by 1,000 tiny cuts. At dinner, Melissa started saying things like, "Walter gets confused with technology anytime I asked questions about household bills or mortgage notices left on the counter." Jason laughed one evening and told his friends during a barbecue, "Dad still thinks milk costs $2. Everybody chuckled politely while I stood there holding a tray of hamburgers like some retired fool disconnected from reality. I started trying to fix things quietly. That is what people like me do. We think communication can repair disrespect if we stay calm enough. One morning while everybody was gone, I wrote Jason a handwritten letter at the kitchen table. For pages. I still remember every word because I rewrote parts of it 3 times. I told him I did not need praise for helping with the house, but I needed honesty. I told him I felt erased. I even wrote, I do not want money to come between us. I just want to feel like your father again. I left the letter on his desk before driving Ethan to baseball practice. That night the envelope was gone, but Jason never mentioned it. Not once. 2 days later I finally asked him directly, did you read my letter? Jason barely looked up from his laptop. Yeah. And he sighed heavily. Dad, everything does not have to become emotional all the time. Emotional. That word made me feel ridiculous for even trying. A week later I sent him a text message while sitting in the parking lot outside a grocery store. I still remember the exact words because I stared at them for almost 10 minutes before pressing send. I feel like we are drifting apart, and I do not understand why. Jason replied 3 hours later with only 6 words. You are overthinking things again, Dad. Melissa became colder after that. Not openly cruel. Worse. Controlled. Professional almost. She stopped asking my opinion on anything involving the house. Furniture changed without discussion. Family outings happened without anyone mentioning them to me until the last second. One Friday evening, I walked downstairs and saw everybody dressed nicely near the front door. Where are you guys headed? I asked. Melissa grabbed her purse and answered casually. Dinner downtown with some friends. Chloe looked confused and blurted out. Mom said Grandpa would probably make it awkward. The room went dead silent. Melissa immediately forced a smile. Sweetheart, that is not exactly what I meant. But children repeat truths adults accidentally reveal. Jason grabbed the keys and muttered, Dad, do not make this a thing. Then they left me standing alone in the kitchen while their SUV backed out of the driveway. I heated up leftover soup that night and ate by myself at the counter listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Around 10:30, I heard their car return and everybody laughing as they walked inside. Nobody checked whether I was awake. Nobody asked if I had eaten. Nobody even noticed I was sitting there in the dark. And for the first time since moving into that house, I stopped feeling like family and started feeling like furniture. Useful when needed. Invisible when not. The worst part about losing respect inside your own family is how ordinary everything still looks from the outside. The house stayed beautiful. The grass stayed trimmed. Family photos kept appearing online with smiling faces and vacation captions and birthday cakes. But inside that house, something had gone cold. I started waking up earlier just to avoid everyone. Around 5:30 every morning, I would sit alone on the back patio drinking black coffee while Arizona sunlight slowly crept across the yard. Some mornings I could hear Melissa upstairs getting ready for work, cabinet doors opening and closing sharply, heels clicking across hardwood floors. Other mornings I heard Jason downstairs on work calls laughing with clients in a voice he no longer used with me. The strange thing was, nobody officially excluded me from the family. They simply stopped including me. Naturally, invitations became afterthoughts. Conversations ended when I entered rooms. Decisions happened around me instead of with me. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and saw Melissa sorting through a stack of papers near the counter. The second she noticed me, she flipped one page face down. What is that? I asked casually. Nothing important, she replied too fast. But I still caught the words European summer package printed across the top corner before she hid it completely. That night at dinner, Ethan accidentally mentioned Paris while talking about school. Dad says we are flying business class, he said excitedly. Melissa immediately interrupted him. Eat your vegetables, sweetheart. I looked over at Jason. You are taking a Europe trip? Jason barely looked up from his plate. We are thinking about it. Thinking about it. I repeated quietly. You told me 3 months ago money was tight. Jason sighed hard like I was exhausting him. Dad, people are allowed to improve their situation. Improve their situation. I remember staring down at my food after he said that because suddenly every sacrifice I made started replaying in my mind like a bad movie. Linda and I skipped vacations for years building retirement savings. We drove used cars long after we could afford newer ones. She clipped coupons. I worked weekends. And now the same people who once claimed they were drowning financially were discussing luxury European vacations while pretending my contribution barely mattered. That was the moment something inside me finally shifted from hurt into awareness. A few days later, I found myself standing in the garage looking at the last boxes from my old house that I still had not unpacked. Linda's old recipe books, family photo albums, her winter scarf she used to wear even during mild Arizona weather because she always felt cold indoors. I sat on the concrete floor holding one of our old anniversary pictures for almost an hour. In the photo, Jason was maybe 10 years old, smiling between us at Disneyland with missing front teeth and sunburned cheeks. Back then he used to reach for my hand crossing parking lots. Somewhere along the way that little boy disappeared, and I honestly did not know when it happened. That night, I heard Melissa laughing downstairs while showing Jason vacation photos on her tablet. Santorini would look incredible on Instagram, she said. And business class is non-negotiable this time. Jason laughed softly. Dad will probably help once we explain it is for family memories. I went completely still in the hallway outside my room. Neither of them knew I could hear every word. Melissa lowered her voice. You just have to keep him emotionally invested. There was a pause before Jason answered quietly. I know. I do not think I slept at all that night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the darkness, while something painful finally became impossible to ignore. They were not treating me like family anymore. They were managing me. And somehow that realization hurt even worse than the disrespect itself. The next morning, I skipped breakfast with everyone for the first time since moving in. Instead, I drove across town with no destination in mind, and ended up parked outside a small diner Linda and I used to visit years ago after church on Sundays. I sat in my truck for nearly 20 minutes before finally walking inside. The waitress, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, handed me coffee and said softly, "You look like somebody carrying too much by himself." I almost laughed at how accurate that was. Before leaving, she placed the receipt on the table and quietly added, "Sometimes people only value what they think they can lose." I folded that receipt and slipped it into my wallet without really knowing why. But driving home later that afternoon, for the first time in a very long while, I caught myself thinking about what life might look like if I stopped trying so hard to stay wanted by people who had already decided my role in their lives. The strange thing about finally seeing the truth is that once your eyes open, you start noticing how much of yourself you gave away trying to keep other people comfortable. After that night in the hallway overhearing Jason and Melissa talk about me like some emotional investment, I stopped volunteering for everything around the house. Not dramatically, quietly. I still helped Ethan with homework sometimes. I still drove Chloe to piano lessons when necessary. But I stopped jumping every time somebody needed something. And almost immediately, the atmosphere changed. One Tuesday morning, Melissa walked into the kitchen already dressed for work, car keys in hand. "Walter, can you pick up dry cleaning today?" she asked while checking her phone. Normally, I would have said yes before she even finished the sentence. Instead, I took a sip of coffee and calmly replied, "I cannot today." She looked up slowly like she did not understand the words. "Why not? I have plans." The truth was my only plan involved driving across town to a small commercial warehouse I had not visited in years. But for some reason, saying no felt important. Melissa forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Okay," she said stiffly before walking out. That afternoon, I unlocked the dusty storage unit where I had kept old equipment from my HVAC company after retiring. Toolboxes, copper fittings, extension ladders, shelves full of inventory I had not touched since Linda passed. The second I stepped inside and smelled machine oil and old cardboard again, something inside me woke up that had been asleep for years. I spent 4 hours there organizing equipment, cleaning tools, tossing broken parts into dumpsters. Sweat soaked through my shirt, my back ached, and for the first time in months, I actually felt useful instead of tolerated. A few days later, an old contractor friend named Raymond called after hearing through mutual acquaintances that I still had access to commercial HVAC parts. "Walter, you still know rooftop systems better than anybody," he told me over the phone. "I have a school district job backed up for weeks. You interested in consulting a little?" I almost said no automatically. Then I caught myself. "Maybe," I answered carefully. By the following Monday, I was spending mornings reviewing repair bids and helping Raymond troubleshoot large commercial systems around Phoenix. Nothing physically intense. Mostly diagnostics, estimates, planning. But people listened when I spoke again. Younger technicians called me sir and took notes while I explained airflow calculations or compressor issues. One afternoon, a 26-year-old tech named Miguel shook his head while looking over a repair plan I drafted. Man, you forgot more than most guys ever learn. I laughed harder than I had in months. Slowly, my days stopped revolving around waiting to feel included at home. I started eating breakfast at local diners instead of awkward family kitchens. I bought new work boots even though I technically did not need them. I even reopened an old business checking account after Raymond insisted on paying me consulting fees. The first direct deposit hit my account on a Thursday afternoon while I sat in my truck outside Home Depot. I stared at the banking app on my phone for a long time, not because of the money itself, but because it reminded me I still existed outside my role as somebody's aging inconvenience. Jason noticed the changes too. One evening, he walked into the garage while I organized invoices inside an old filing cabinet. "You have been gone a lot lately," he said casually. "Doing some consulting work," I answered. He frowned slightly. "At your age?" I looked up slowly from the paperwork. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" Jason immediately softened his tone. "Nothing bad, Dad. I just thought you were retired. Maybe I got tired of sitting around." He nodded awkwardly, but I noticed something new in his expression for the first time in a long while. Concern. Not concern for me. Concern about losing access to me. Over the next few weeks, Melissa suddenly became warmer again. Too warm. She started asking about my work days, offering coffee in the mornings, mentioning how good it was to see me energized. But by then, I had started paying attention to timing. Every bit of kindness in that house seemed connected to whether I looked financially useful. One Friday night, I came home later than usual after helping Raymond inspect a hotel cooling system downtown. As I walked through the front door, I heard excited voices coming from the dining room. Melissa had brochures spread across the table while Jason scrolled through flight prices on his laptop. "If we book before summer," Melissa said excitedly, "we can still get the upgraded seats." Then Jason noticed me standing there. He closed the laptop halfway and smiled carefully. "Dad," he said, "we were actually hoping to talk to you about something big." What Jason and Melissa did not realize was that the more distance I created from that house, the clearer my head became. Somewhere between early morning job sites, long drives across Phoenix, and greasy diner coffee with contractors half my age, I slowly started feeling like myself again. Not the version of me they kept trying to shrink into a quiet old man sitting politely in the corner, but the man I had been for 40 years before grief hollowed me out. Raymond eventually stopped calling me a consultant and started introducing me as the guy who keeps this whole operation running. The first time he said it was during a meeting with a property management company overseeing 6 commercial buildings in downtown Phoenix. We sat around a conference table while younger technicians argued over repair costs and replacement schedules. Finally, Raymond pointed toward me and said, "Ask Walter. He has been solving problems longer than all of us combined." Everybody went quiet. I spread blueprints across the table, explained why their cooling system failures kept repeating, and outlined a repair plan that would save them nearly $80,000 over 5 years. By the end of the meeting, the property manager shook my hand firmly and said, "You should still be running your own company." Walking back to my truck afterward, I realized something simple but powerful. Outside that house, people still respected me. A month later, Raymond handed me a dark blue work jacket with stitched lettering above the chest pocket that read, "Bennett Consulting Services." I stared at those words longer than I probably should have. My own name, my own identity, not somebody's dependent, not somebody's obligation. Mine. "You earned it," Raymond told me. "Wear it." And I did. Every morning after that, I put on that jacket before leaving the house, and somehow it changed the way I carried myself. Even Ethan noticed. "Grandpa, you look official," he said one morning while waiting for the school bus. I smiled and tapped the stitched name on my chest. "Feels good to remember who you are sometimes." The money started improving too. Not outrageous amounts, but enough that I stopped worrying about draining retirement savings. I opened a separate savings account, bought myself a newer pickup truck with lower mileage, replaced my cracked reading glasses instead of putting it off for months. Tiny things maybe, but after years of giving every extra piece of myself away, taking care of my own life again felt strangely emotional. Meanwhile, Jason and Melissa grew increasingly interested in my schedule. "You have another meeting today?" Melissa asked one evening while pretending to casually wash dishes. Might be late, I answered. Jason looked up immediately from his laptop. Late where? Tucson, I said. Commercial project. He exchanged a quick glance with Melissa before asking, that paying well? I remember smiling slightly because for the first time in years, I recognized the pattern while it was happening instead of afterward. Well enough, I replied calmly. Their Europe trip planning became more aggressive after that. Brochures covered the dining table almost nightly now. Greece, Italy, Paris. Melissa talked about rooftop restaurants and luxury resorts while Jason compared airline packages online. One evening, he spun the laptop toward me. Check this out, Dad. Business class seats fully recline now. I looked at the screen quietly. For business class tickets, nearly $31,000 total after hotels and excursions. Melissa leaned forward, smiling carefully. We really want this to be a once-in-a-lifetime family memory for the kids. I noticed she never mentioned paying for it themselves. A few nights later, Jason cornered me in the garage while I packed tools into the truck for an early morning inspection. Dad, can I ask you something? He said cautiously. Depends what it is. He rubbed the back of his neck before speaking. You know how much the kids mean to you. There it was. Not gratitude. Not connection. Positioning. Negotiation. I closed the toolbox slowly and looked directly at him. What exactly are you asking me for, Jason? He hesitated for half a second before forcing a smile. Nothing yet. We just thought maybe the whole family could celebrate together this summer. I nodded once without answering. But deep down, I already knew where this was heading. And standing there under the garage lights watching my son carefully calculate how to approach me, I finally understood something painful. The man who used to run into my arms after work was gone. In his place stood somebody who only seemed warm whenever he needed access to what I could provide. And somehow, without realizing it, I was getting closer and closer to the night everything finally exploded. By the time summer arrived, the entire atmosphere inside the house felt strangely rehearsed, like everybody was waiting for something important without saying it out loud. Melissa kept printed travel itineraries spread across the kitchen counter almost daily now. Rome, Paris, Santorini. Luxury hotel confirmations clipped together with color-coded folders. She talked about the trip constantly, but never directly asked me for money. That was Jason's job. He handled pressure quietly, carefully, like a salesman warming up a client before closing the deal. One evening, I came home from a long inspection job at a hospital renovation site in Mesa and found Jason sitting alone at the patio table with 2 glasses of iced tea already poured. You got a minute? He asked casually. The sky was turning orange over the backyard, and the heat was finally starting to break after another brutal Arizona day. I sat down slowly, still wearing my Bennett Consulting jacket. Jason noticed it immediately. You really seem happier lately, he said. I am working again, I replied. Feels good to use my brain. He nodded quietly before leaning back in his chair. You know, Melissa and I were talking. Maybe this Europe trip could be good for everybody. Family bonding. A reset. There it was again. Family. The word only appeared now when money sat nearby. Sounds expensive, I said calmly. Jason laughed lightly. Everything is expensive now. Then he slid a printed estimate across the table. $31,412. Business class flights. Luxury hotels. Private tours. I stared at the paper for several seconds without speaking. That is a lot of money for people who nearly lost their house 2 years ago. Jason's jaw tightened just slightly. We are doing better now. Then why are you showing me this? He hesitated. Dad, come on. I looked up slowly. No. Say it clearly. For the first time in a long while, I watched my son become uncomfortable instead of me. He shifted in his chair and lowered his voice. The kids would remember this forever. That is not what I asked. Silence stretched between us while sprinklers hissed softly across the lawn nearby. Finally, Jason sighed heavily. We thought maybe you could help with some of it. Some of it. The estimate sat directly between us with a highlighted payment balance circled in yellow marker. I almost laughed. How much is some? Jason rubbed the back of his neck. Most of it. I leaned back slowly in my chair. And for once, instead of feeling guilty or pressured, I just felt tired. Tired of the strategy. Tired of the emotional packaging wrapped around every financial request. I need time to think, I answered calmly. Jason immediately frowned. Time for what? For deciding whether this sounds like a family memory or a luxury shopping spree. His expression hardened instantly. You know, Dad, not everything is manipulation. Funny, I replied quietly. I was starting to think the same thing. He stood up abruptly after that conversation ended, muttering something under his breath before heading inside. But the strange thing was, for the first time in years, I did not feel afraid of disappointing him. Because somewhere along the line, the power inside that relationship had quietly shifted. I knew things they did not realize I knew. I understood how they operated now. And most importantly, I had stopped confusing guilt with love. A week later, the confrontation finally arrived. It happened on a Thursday night in the exact same kitchen where everything eventually fell apart. Melissa was frustrated because a payment deadline for the Europe package was approaching. Jason looked tense. The second I walked through the door after work, Ethan and Chloe were upstairs. The house felt too quiet. Did you make a decision yet? Melissa asked immediately without even saying hello. I set my truck keys on the counter. About what? Her smile disappeared. Walter, please do not do that. Jason stepped forward. Dad, we need to finalize this tonight. I looked from one face to the other and suddenly saw everything clearly. Not family members asking for support. Two people trying to secure access to funding before losing control of the conversation. I said I was thinking about it, I answered calmly. Melissa crossed her arms tightly. You know, most grandparents would want to create memories for their grandkids. I stared at her for a long moment. Most grandparents probably did not already give away $148,000. The room went completely silent after that. Jason's expression changed instantly. Sharp, defensive, dangerous in a way I had not seen before. Then he took one slow step toward me and said something that finally shattered whatever remained between us. Jason stood there staring at me across the kitchen island while the tension in the room turned almost physical. Melissa stayed completely still beside him with both arms folded tightly against her chest. Nobody raised their voice. That was the strange part. After years of emotional pressure and quiet manipulation, the moment everything finally cracked happened almost calmly. You keep bringing up that number like we owe you forever, Jason said flatly. I looked at him carefully before answering. No, I bring it up because you both keep pretending it never existed. Melissa exhaled sharply. Nobody is pretending anything. Really? I asked. Then why does everybody think I moved in because I could not support myself? Neither of them answered. Outside, I could hear sprinklers clicking across the lawn in steady little bursts while the refrigerator hummed softly behind us. Jason finally leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. Dad, people do not need every detail of our finances. Interesting choice of words, I replied quietly. Our finances. That landed. Harder than I expected. Melissa immediately stepped in. Walter, this is exactly why conversations with you have become difficult lately. Everything turns into some kind of accusation. I nodded slowly. No, I think what changed is that I finally stopped ignoring things. Silence again. The kind that tells you everybody in the room understands more than they are willing to admit. Then Jason looked directly at me and said something that honestly surprised me. You have changed. I almost smiled hearing that because for the first time in years, he was absolutely right. Yeah, I answered calmly. I think I have. Melissa pulled one of the travel folders closer and tried changing the subject. Can we please just focus on the trip for 1 second? The final payment is due Monday. I looked down at the brochure spread open across the counter. White beaches, luxury suites, sunset yacht dinners. Everything polished and perfect. How much have you already committed? I asked. Jason hesitated briefly before answering. Most of it. Using what money? Another silence. Then Melissa spoke carefully. We assumed you would help once you saw how important this was to the kids. No, I replied softly. You assumed I would feel guilty enough to say yes. Jason's face hardened instantly. That is unfair. Is it? I reached into my work jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. You want honesty? Let us do honesty. Melissa looked uneasy immediately. What are you talking about? I opened the banking app slowly and turned the screen toward them. You know what the funny thing about getting older is? People start assuming you do not pay attention to paperwork. Jason frowned. Dad, what is this? This, I answered calmly, is the account connected to the travel package. Both of them went completely still. Melissa's expression changed first, then Jason's. I watched recognition slowly hit them both at exactly the same time. You used my card information for the reservation hold, I said quietly. The same emergency account connected to the mortgage transfer. Melissa immediately stepped forward. Walter, we were going to tell you. When? I interrupted. After the charge cleared? Jason rubbed his forehead hard. Dad, calm down. I am calm. And honestly, I was. That was the part neither of them knew how to handle anymore. I was not emotional. I was not desperate for approval. I was simply awake now. You had no right to go through that account, Jason snapped suddenly. Actually, I answered, I had every right. It is my account. Melissa looked genuinely nervous now. Nobody stole from you. No, I said softly. You just kept making decisions assuming I would quietly fund them. Jason took one frustrated step toward me. You always act like we are using you. I stared at him for several long seconds before answering. That is because you are. The words hit the room like a power outage. Nobody moved. Upstairs, I could hear faint footsteps from the kids' bedrooms, while downstairs, everything suddenly felt cold and exposed. Then I reached into my pocket again and placed a folded set of papers on the counter between us. Jason looked down first. Melissa leaned closer beside him. And the second they saw the documents, the color drained completely from both of their faces. Because sitting there under the kitchen lights was a copy of the housing agreement they thought I never properly read. Jason grabbed the papers first. I watched his eyes move rapidly across the pages while Melissa leaned over his shoulder, trying to read at the same time. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Jason looked up sharply. Where did you get this copy? The question almost made me laugh because the answer was so obvious. From the attorney who handled the filing, I said calmly. The same attorney whose business card was attached to the paperwork you rushed me through signing. Melissa's face tightened instantly. Walter, this is ridiculous. No, I replied quietly. What is ridiculous is that both of you genuinely believed I never followed up. Jason tossed the papers back onto the counter harder than necessary. That agreement was only for legal protection. Correct, I answered. Mine. The kitchen fell silent again. I could actually hear the ticking clock near the pantry now. Jason rubbed both hands over his face before speaking carefully. Dad, what exactly are you trying to say? I looked directly at him. I am saying the equity agreement tied to that mortgage transfer gives me legal ownership interest in this property. Melissa immediately shook her head. That is not true. It is absolutely true, I replied. 35%. Jason stared at me like he no longer recognized the man standing across from him. And honestly, maybe he did not. Because the version of me they depended on would have stayed quiet forever just to avoid conflict. But that man was gone now. You went behind our backs? Melissa asked. No, I said evenly. I finally stopped ignoring what was happening in front of me. Jason's breathing turned heavier. Dad, nobody was trying to screw you over. Maybe not at first, I answered. But somewhere along the line, both of you got very comfortable treating my contribution like it belonged to you. Melissa stepped closer to the counter, lowering her voice into that soft, controlled tone she always used when trying to manage a situation. Walter, listen to yourself. This is family. Families help each other. Families also tell the truth, I replied. Families do not quietly rewrite history until the person funding their life starts looking like a dependent. That one hit hard. I could see it immediately in both their faces. Because for the first time, somebody had finally said the quiet part out loud. Upstairs, a door creaked open slightly. Ethan's footsteps crossed the hallway overhead before stopping again. The kids knew something serious was happening. Jason noticed too. He lowered his voice instantly. You are blowing this way out of proportion. No, I answered calmly. I stayed silent while it became proportion. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and placed another document beside the first set of papers. Melissa looked down first, and her entire expression changed. What is this? She whispered. Cancellation confirmations, I said. Jason froze. What cancellations? I met his eyes directly. The Europe package. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed for a second. Melissa grabbed the pages with shaking fingers while Jason stared at me in disbelief. You canceled the trip, he asked quietly. This afternoon. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. Melissa looked horrified now. Walter, those reservations were locked in. Not when they were attached to my financial accounts. Jason took one step backward like somebody had physically shoved him. Dad, the kids know about this trip. Then maybe you should not have planned it using money that was never yours. His face went pale hearing that. Not angry anymore. Shocked. because this was the first time in years he had completely lost control of the conversation. Melissa suddenly slammed the paperwork onto the counter. "Do you understand what you just did?" she snapped. "Yes," I answered softly. I finally drew a line. Down the hallway, Chloe suddenly appeared near the staircase, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mom?" she asked nervously. "Why are you yelling?" The second Jason looked toward his daughter, something inside him cracked slightly. I saw it happen in real time. Because now the consequences were no longer theoretical. The trip was gone. The money was gone. And the story they spent years building around me was beginning to collapse right in front of them. Jason turned back toward me slowly, his voice lower than I had ever heard it before. "You would really do this to your own family?" I stared at my son for a long moment before answering. "No, Jason." I finally stopped letting my family do it to me. And standing there under those kitchen lights while Melissa silently stared at the cancellation notices in disbelief, I realized something painful. Even after everything that happened, part of me still wished they would apologize instead of looking at me like I had betrayed them. The weeks after that night felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but clearer. Like walking outside after one of those violent Arizona dust storms finally passes and realizing you can see the mountains again. Jason barely spoke to me for several days after the cancellations. Melissa avoided eye contact almost entirely. The house itself felt tense and exhausted, like everybody inside it finally understood the old version of me was not coming back. And eventually, I realized something important. I did not want revenge anymore. I wanted distance. Real distance. So 2 months later, I moved out quietly. No dramatic goodbye. No screaming. No final explosion. I rented a small condo just outside Prescott, Arizona, about 90 minutes north of Phoenix, where the mornings were cooler and the air smelled like pine instead of concrete. The place was nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, tiny back patio facing a stretch of dry grass and open sky. But the first night I slept there, I slept 8 straight hours without waking up once. That had not happened in years. I kept working with Raymond too. Not because I desperately needed the money anymore, but because it reminded me I still had value beyond what I could provide emotionally or financially to other people. Sometimes I helped train younger technicians. Sometimes I just handled consulting calls from the patio with coffee in my hand while morning sunlight came through the windows. Little by little, my life stopped revolving around proving my worth to people who had already decided my role for me. Jason eventually called. The first conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. "The kids miss you," he said quietly. "I miss them too," I answered. Then there was silence before he finally asked, "Are you ever coming back?" I looked out across the Prescott Hills while wind moved softly through the trees outside my patio. "No," I said gently. "I do not think that house was ever really home for me." He did not argue. I think part of him finally understood that some damage does not explode all at once. It accumulates quietly until one day there is simply nothing left holding people together anymore. Melissa never apologized directly. But one afternoon, nearly 6 months later, a package arrived at my condo. Inside was Linda's old coffee mug I thought had disappeared during the move. The same cream-colored mug with tiny blue flowers around the rim that I used to hold while sitting in our old kitchen before work every morning. No note. No explanation. Just the mug wrapped carefully in newspaper. I stood there holding it for a very long time. Funny how small objects sometimes carry entire lifetimes inside them. These days I still see Ethan and Chloe occasionally. We go fishing sometimes near Watson Lake. Ethan is taller now. Chloe still hugs me the second she sees me. Kids understand love better than adults sometimes because they have not yet learned how to attach conditions to it. And Jason? Well, I love my son. I probably always will. But loving somebody does not mean you keep handing them the tools to destroy your peace. That took me 72 years to learn. If there is one thing this whole experience taught me, it is that boundaries are not cruelty. Protecting yourself is not selfish. And growing older does not mean your dignity becomes negotiable. Sometimes people slowly reduce you into a role that benefits them because they assume you will tolerate it forever. But the moment you begin valuing yourself again, everything changes. Your voice changes. Your posture changes. Even silence changes. I also learned something else. If your instincts keep whispering that something feels wrong, listen to them. God gave us intuition for a reason. Deep down, most of us recognize disrespect long before we admit it out loud. We just stay quiet because we are afraid of losing people we love. But losing yourself hurts far worse in the long run. So if somebody listening right now feels trapped inside a relationship where your kindness is constantly being mistaken for weakness, please hear me when I say this. You are allowed to take your life back. You are allowed to protect your finances, your peace, your energy, and your self-respect. And you do not need permission from the people benefiting from your silence to finally choose yourself. My name is Walter Bennett. I am 72 years old, and the biggest lesson I want to leave with you is this. Never let your love for others become an excuse to abandon yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Truly, stories like this remind people they are not as alone as they think they are. And if this story stayed with you in some way, maybe leave a comment sharing where you are listening from, because there are more people carrying quiet heartbreak than the world ever realizes. And if you enjoy these kinds of deeply human stories about family, betrayal, healing, and second chances, there are many more waiting for you in this channel's playlist. Some will make you angry. Some might break your heart a little. But a few of them just might help somebody finally see their own life differently. Until next time, take care of yourself. And do not ignore the voice inside you when it starts asking for peace.